Okay, Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a virtual meeting of the Pensions Committee of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. My name is Councillor Martin Goddard, and I'm the chairman for this meeting. Before we start, some important online housekeeping for everyone present. Firstly, please do keep any mobile phones around you on silent. Secondly, please keep microphones muted when not speaking, and then unmute to speak. Only one person should speak at any time, and I as chairman will call on those to speak and will keep an eye on the room throughout my gallery view for those indicating. Before we move through the agenda, I'd like to do a roll call of all those present to confirm attendance. So please indicate you are present when I say your name. Councillor Philip Cawthorne.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Morse, I know we're waiting for still, I think. Councillor Raymond Graham. I know we can see you, but we can't hear you. So I think we should continue. Councillor Tony Edgington.
Yes, Chair, I'm here.
Thank you very much. Then to the officers present, same thing, if you can please indicate. Paul Waymond, Corporate Director of Finance.
Present.
Thank you. James Lake, Chief Accountant.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Yvonne Thompson-Hoyt, Interim Manager Pension Fund.
Present, Chair.
Thank you very much. Tunde Adekoya, Pension Fund Accountant.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Liz Penny, Democratic Services Officer.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And then members of the Pensions Board, Hayley Seabrook.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Roger Hackett.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. And Tony Noakes.
Present, Chair.
Thank you very much. Then to the external advisors, Claire Scott.
Present, Chair.
Thank you very much. David O'Hara.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. And Andrew Singh.
Present, Chair.
Thank you very much. In terms of technical meeting control, if any councillor leaves the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time, for example, as a result of a lost connection, I will continue the meeting unless we are not quorate, and a quorum is 3 councillors. Importantly, if any councillor who does leave the meeting for a period of time, they will not be able to vote on the item which they were not present for. If we now turn to the agenda then, please. Firstly, Liz, do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies today, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Morse is having some difficulties joining us at the moment.
Noted, thank you. Secondly, declarations of interest in any matters coming before this meeting.
Yes, I'd better declare an interest as a retired member of the pension.
Thank you, Tony. And Philip?
I'm a deferred member, I think is the correct expression.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Noted. Okay, so then next we move to receive and agree the minutes of the last meeting, which took place on the 28th of October 2020. Now, in the interest of time and efficiency, rather than turn the pages, can I ask if any members have any points to raise on those minutes, please? If not, I will take them as an accurate reflection and approved. I'm not seeing any. Okay, so I will take those as agreed and approved. To confirm that items 1 to 9 of the agenda will be dealt with in public and therefore viewable on the YouTube channel. Items 10 to 12 are to be dealt with in private in part 2 of the agenda. So therefore, may we then turn to agenda item 5, which is a summary of investment strategy and performance. James, can I turn that over to you, please?
Thank you, Chairman. As shown in the report, the fund value as at September was 1.076 billion, which is a slight increase on the June figure. However, I would like to highlight the December quarter value of 1.135 billion, which is an increase of £59 million on the September figure. The latest figure as of today, which is actually yesterday's value, the unaudited figure is 1.148 billion, which I believe is an all-time high for the fund. To help appreciate how the fund has moved since COVID, I asked Tunde to add a fund value graph this quarter in the report. This shows the movement since the formal valuation and also how we've recouped losses since the COVID impact. So hopefully our committee find that of some use. Performance against the benchmark is not quite so positive, being behind in each reporting timeframe. Much of this can be attributed to poor performance by the two active managers, UBS and the ELSIV Income Fund, so EPOC. However, our committee has since taken action to address this. Although the shorter timeframes are below target, the 5-year and since inception annualized performance is above the 4% required by the fund. We will speak about the wider investment strategy in part 2. So in the meantime, I will pass back to committee for any questions, if I may.
Thank you, James. So can I turn it over to the committee to raise any questions they may have? I believe Councillor Morse has joined us. Good afternoon, John. You haven't missed anything of substance, I can assure you. It's good to see you.
No, I've been having technical trouble. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. So any questions on the summary of investment strategy and performance? Not seeing anything. No. No, Tony, please.
Yes, Chair. If I just looked at on page 12, the period of measurement 1 year, we seem to be well off the benchmark, over 5 points or 5% off the benchmark, which seems to me to be a bit worrying. We've been below the benchmark in every instance on that graph, but on that table, but that seems particularly bad. I wonder whether there was any particular fund manager which was creating that problem.
James, can you comment on that?
Well, the big impact will be the sort of UBS and EPOC, who've suffered a lot during that 1 year period. So they, for me, they're the biggest sort of, because they've also got quite heavy, chunky portfolios as well. So over a sort of £100 million each. So their underperformance, which is quite considerable, has had a massive impact on the 1 year figure. I mean, I'm not sure if I could pass over to David from ISIO to have, if he's got any sort of thoughts, but that would be my main sort of observation. Also, some of the smaller funds are showing sort of extreme underperformance. So the maturing private equity and the private debt, which is sort of almost sort of just winding down to next to nothing. So I think they're slightly distorting the figures as well. But really their holdings are quite minimal, but their underperformance in the whole benchmark or the whole return in terms of a relative performance, it has quite a big impact.
Yeah, so just to concur with what James said there, the big impact is UBS and EPOC. So EPOC underperforming the benchmark by around 13% over the year, and UBS so similar. So those two managers combined have pulled the fund performance below the benchmark. So there are other elements that contribute, but that's where the majority of it sits.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile making the point that in both instances, both UBS and EPOC, the committee has already agreed corrective action. Would it also, David, be correct to say that what we have got in there as well are some, can I put it, almost judgmental markdowns in areas like real estate and private equity? Where there isn't a ready-made index, so you are relying on the judgment call of the fund managers really to set values in these unusual times.
Indeed, so the private equity assets over the quarter have underperformed. Just there tends to be a lag in those assets being marked to market. So you would expect, as the recovery in quoted markets has come through, the private equity assets will come up next quarter. And on the property markets, the managers have made some adjustments post-COVID. And again, in terms of the latest position, we're starting to see quite a bit of that reverse out as property markets recover with the vaccine news and everything else. So again, we would expect some of that to unwind over the next 3 to 6 months.
Thank you. Tony, is that give you an adequate explanation?
It explains it, yes.
On that? Thank you.
Not happy, but...
Well, sure, absolutely. But there we go. Okay, any other questions or comments, observations on... I'm not seeing any other indications. So, so that being the case, can we therefore have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that we note the fund performance update, please? Philip, I think is that a hand I see, or I think it is. Yes. Okay.
Yes, indeed, it is. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. You disappeared from the screen completely at one point there. Okay.
I'm happy to second that, Chairman.
Thank you, Ray. That's very helpful. Thanks a lot. So, moving on then to agenda item 6, which is suspension of the abatement policy and a review of that decision. Yvonne, please, can I pass this one across to you?
Thank you, Chair. In April 2020, the committee agreed to suspend the reduction in pensions benefit for those rejoining the workforce to assist in the COVID-19 emergency. This was agreed for 1 year. Almost a year on, and the COVID-19 emergency has entered a new phase of resurgence, vaccine outrolls, and increased testing. Forecasts from the government and their experts indicate that resources will still be required into the future. And in this regard, it is recommended that the committee extend the suspension of abatement for a further 12 months to assist in this effort. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Yvonne. Now, just to clarify, thanks, Tony, I'll come to you in a second. Just to clarify, I think when this was first passed, I think the authorization for it was delegated to Paul because the committee wasn't sitting at that stage. Am I correct in assuming that the committee can make this determination in its own right this time round as we are sitting? Is that correct?
It was delegated to Paul and then ratified. It came to the committee afterwards for ratification.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think this time round we can just agree the extension if we so decide to do. Yeah, I think that's the case. Yeah.
Yes.
Nodding heads. Tony, I think you wanted to raise something, and then John, after you. Yeah.
I was going to question that there was no extra cost to the pension line, because obviously there is a cost, but I imagine it's fairly marginal. It does say here on page 37 that there was no extra cost, whereas possibly there wasn't, but there was the possibility there was a cost if somebody joining, because their pension would have been reduced and therefore it would have been a saving for the fund. Having said that, my view is that and from what I understand, generally speaking, it's very difficult to administer anyway, because one cannot be sure that somebody who is a pensioner of our local government pension scheme has not working for another local government authority, and therefore again their pension perhaps should be abated. But I wonder, and I know that certain local government pension schemes have stopped the abatement altogether. I wonder whether we could consider that in as well in the future, not this time, but in the future, because it will simplify matters. It would mean that there would be no concern trying to trace individual pensioners to make sure that they aren't working somewhere else in the government, for the government or local government.
Yeah, I take your point, Tony. I mean, this is almost a voluntary issue, isn't it? If the information isn't volunteered for us, it's very hard for us to transact it. I think that's probably the way I would look at it. And so I would personally, I would be sympathetic to the idea of bringing this back and considering a permanent change. You know, if the view of officers and advisors is that there is not a material cost element to so doing this. Interested whether other members have any views on that. Not seeing anything, but in that case, I suggest we bring it back at a future meeting. John,
I am trying to use the electronic flagging system, but I don't know.
It's working. Yes,
well, I'm turning it off. My only point is, I think this should actually come back, and I agree with Councillor Egginton's point. But I just wanted to make sure you can see my hand.
Indeed, we could see the both your hand and indeed the electronic signal.
Right.
Okay. Any other points anybody wants to raise? No. Okay. So the recommendation is that the committee extends the suspension of the policy to abate pensions for a further 12 months in order to support the COVID-19 emergency. Tony, you're proposing that. Thank you. Yeah, and do we have a seconder, please? John?
I'm prepared to second, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. So then we move to item number 7, which is the administration report. Yvonne, I think this is you again, please.
Thanks, Chair. Okay. I'll start with the member self-service report, which has been consistent, small increase in numbers signing up for self-service. Continue to sign up for self-service each quarter. 27% of the membership have now signed up. And on to the Kpi reporting. This continues to be disappointing. It continues to be disappointing. There's no clear indication of the direction of travel because different elements of it, you see an improvement one month and then the next month that area is down and another area is up. So there's no clear indication of the direction of travel. The results continues to be well below what the expected performance should be. What we have requested is that an additional column be added on because we know that they are missing the KPI, the SLA target, but we also wanted to know whether having missed that target, are they then falling within the statutory targets? So we've asked for an additional column to be added on to indicate that. The result shows that those with a statutory deadline, for most of them, they were eventually resolved within the statutory target. I think that is on page 42. Yes, on page 42, there's a landscape report. And out to the extreme right-hand side, there's an additional column which indicates whether they missed the statutory deadline. Now, at the very end, there is the deferred benefit notifications. where it has been highlighted that 5 of those not only missed the internal target, but also missed the statutory deadline. We have asked for further information regarding, what was the reason for this, which we have received. The indication was that there were remaining queries outstanding from the employers to be able to complete those. But overall, I mean, the results are still very, very disappointing. Staffing and resources, I think with the new restrictions put in place, all staff are working from home again. And the annual allowance letters, I think at the last committee, it was reported that they were all completed, but it subsequently came to light that 8 out of the 22 letters were issued after the statutory deadline by about 2 to 7 days. This was picked up prior to the pension board, which we have reported in the breaches log, and also we've reported it to the board as well. Then we're on to ongoing projects. The annual address tracing that was signed off in early January. This will be conducted, managed by Surrey, but conducted by ITM. And the results of these will be known in March. So hopefully we'll be able to report to the committee on the outcome of that in March. And the Gmp Reconciliation, at the last committee, it was reported that this project was suspended because of final data that was due from HMRC. This data has since been received. It has since been received, and I think we've had an update since this report. Yesterday, we actually received the final GMP report from Mercer. So that will then take us into the rectification stage. So all the work that Mercer needed to do to the reconciliation to pick out the discrepancies between our records and the HMRC records, all that work has now been done and a final report issued. And there are a few decisions that need to be made by Hillingdon to allow them to then actually go to the individual records and perform the rectification. So that has, well, it's almost to the end now. And the McLeod, for the McLeod remedy, sorry, they are in the process of looking at the options, how they want to carry out this project, whether they want to do it internally or to use an external agent to do it. However, they did send out in the January newsletter to employers for them to expect a data request from them. I think, well, there are further complications to this project because it is a long project, but those will be picked up in part 2 in order for us to make a decision, whether we start this project at this point or at a later date. But more information on that is available in part 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Yvonne. May I ask one question, please? Just thinking about the ongoing projects, can you advise, are there any other data accuracy projects which are identified and out for tender at the moment over and above those that are actually in progress? Can you tell me?
Yes, Chair. There is the ongoing, the Status 2 Backlog project, which we had a final report on, along with suggestions as to how to take it forward. It is not actually out for tender at the moment, but we are looking at options again, how to approach that project, how to get those backlogs, how to get them processed. We have actually identified a number of cases in the region of about 1,500 cases that appear to have records on them that are ready to be processed. So officers are currently looking at options as to when and how to get those processed. Again, more information, more detailed information can be given on that in part 2.
Thank you, Yvonne. Philip, I think you have mastered the technology, and I see a hand up.
You can teach an old dog new tricks, Chairman. I'm just about getting there. Thank you. A couple of observations on this. I mean, not sure how far I should go in part 1. I'll be cautious with my comments. I mean, it is concerning to note the ongoing problems that we're hearing about from Surrey. We know that this is drawing to a close. I'm conscious of all officers trying to do to make it work. I just wonder whether, bearing in mind they're still under contract to us, there's anything perhaps further we should be doing in terms of seeking redress, or do we think this is something that we just have to manage as best we can in challenging circumstances? So that's the first thing. It's a question, I suppose. And then McLeod, I sort of wince at the thought of them taking on McLeod, quite honestly, at the moment, given what we've seen. We know it's a heavy administrative burden, from what I understand. I'll just observe that at this stage and just see what comments there are in relation to it, please.
Thank you, Philip. James, or is it perhaps Paul? I wonder if you could comment on the question about redress from Surrey, given the where we find ourselves. And I must say, the fact that we have 5 deferred benefit notifications where we've missed the statutory deadline, I must say I too find very concerning. So I would welcome comments in terms of what redress we may have at some stage.
Well, I think we do need to manage the contract very tightly over the remaining months to make sure that they don't almost stop working for us. But there is a limit to how far we can go with that. It's a sort of balancing act, because we want them to do various things for us between now and the end of the contract and as part of the transition. So I guess we will have to manage it as carefully as we can in terms of keeping them on everything, but keeping them engaged until the bitter end in terms of the transition. I don't know if James, you think we can find them or anything, but my view is you've got to sort of manage them as best you can through to the end. It will be difficult though, because they will probably lose resource as the contract progresses towards the end. So I think the more work that they can subcontract out that needs doing before the end, the better, rather than just relying on themselves, really.
I would agree with what Paul has said. I think it is a balancing act, and we do need to make sure we manage the contract and at least sort of try and maintain the service we're getting. And I think potentially taking sort of, I don't know, or asking for redress may sort of undo that balance, and therefore may sort of end up sort of reducing the quality of service. In terms of McLeod, I mean, at the moment it's just the first stage is actually just trying to possibly get data. I think when it comes to actually implementing it, the contract will be with Hampshire at that point. So it'll almost be sort of a 2-stage. I think there is a chance that Surrey or somebody that Surrey contracts gets the data, but then actually sort of implementing in the system will be part of Hampshire's work.
Yeah, I'm just reacting to that a little bit, if I may. I do understand it's a delicate balance, and we don't want to unseat the transition process, and Surrey's part in that. I guess if we find ourselves, with, having penalties or whatever to deal with ourselves as a result of breaches of statutory deadlines, then, we've got something very specific and very clear that we can pick up at the end once the transition has concluded. I don't know whether that's an option, but I take the point that perhaps these issues could be held over and swept up at the end. Perhaps that's an option. Yeah. Okay. Philip, do you want to come back on that at all? John, I'll come to you in a second.
No, I think they're fair answers. It's a difficult situation. No, nothing further to add on that.
Thank you. John.
As delay on the McLeod remedy looks the best option, legally, how long can we actually delay looking at this issue and still be legally correct?
I'm sorry, was that in relation to McLeod?
No.
Yes, I think it was.
If we make a decision to delay collecting the data for the McLeod remedy, what legal restrictions are there any issues which time limit our delay?
Okay. Nope. All right. It is expected that McLeod will take, I think it's a few years rather than, say months to conclude. Now, that first element of collecting the data, what we have put in place, because we have discussed it with Hampshire, and we do understand between us that it may start in one administration and go over to the other. So that simple first stage of collecting data, we have already agreed, and the data collection template is exactly the same. We have agreed that. So we may end up doing that first bit here, and then by the time those records come back in, then they will be handed over to the next, you will be handed over to Hampshire, because, well, the time remaining is months rather than years, and it's not a short process. It isn't a short process. It will be years rather than months to complete.
John, do you want to come back on that?
No, I'll accept that because I find it a difficult position.
Yes,
I
it's
could try and look at a delay, but
yeah. Yvonne, perhaps if I can ask you another question about this. What I took from your comments was that actually there is a certain amount of discretion that sits with Surrey in terms of whether they start to deal with the data collection action of this whole McLeod issue themselves, or whether they outsource it. Do we not have any influence in that decision? Is it entirely their discretion?
But my understanding is, I think, can't remember, one of the councillors mentioned it, that there is a resource issue. So I think, that's why they're looking to outside to, see whether they want to outsource it. Another option that they have given was that the software provider, Haywood, they were building a special add-on to the system to be able to identify the cases that would fall within the realm that needs to be rectified. So they have not decided as yet how they are going to deal with it. And I think at this stage, if they are not sure, and I think even when that decision is made, then it may or may not be suitable for where we are at this time. Because if it's going to start at a place where it can't be properly completed to fit in with the timetable, with the transition timetable, then, it mightn't be feasible to start it if it can't be if a certain part can't be closed off to, so it's kind of being considered in the whole along the transition. Yeah.
So if I understand you correctly, then it's incumbent upon Surrey to come forward with their proposed solution. It's then our discretion as to whether we accept that solution.
Yes, sir.
Is
Yes.
that correct? Yeah. Okay.
That's right, sir.
That's slightly more reassuring. Thank you. Claire, you've indicated.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make an observation around the breaches and breaches log. The pensions regulator, expects anyone associated with a pension scheme to consider whether any breaches are reportable to the regulator. Now, it could be that the officers have this process already covered internally, but perhaps suggest that in future reports it is mentioned as to whether such breaches have been seen to be reportable and whether that decision to report has been done. I think that might be helpful for the committee.
Thank you. That's helpful. I had assumed that perhaps that was a mistake, but I had assumed that this would be reportable. Yvonne, can you? Yeah.
Yes, if I may say, Chair, there is a breaches log, and it is presented to the board at their meeting. Now, this was the breach mentioned in the administration report is on the breaches log, and we use the TPR's assessment tool to determine whether or not it was a reportable breach. And it was determined, well, first by officers that it was not a reportable breach, and that was also agreed at the board. So we do make it, we do bring these things before the board, and the log is kept and it is assessed against the TPR's tool. Well, we could consider bringing it to the to committee as well. So yeah, but there is a breach log. We do keep a breaches log.
Thank you. Claire.
Yeah, that sounds very reassuring that the board are seeing that and the log is being kept and the process is being followed. I guess the additional commentary is that just a line or two in the committee report highlighting that has been done and whether any breaches have been reported to the regulator or not, and it just closes the loop and the communication circle.
Yeah, I think your point's well made. So I think perhaps if officers could note that and reflect that in future reports, that would be much appreciated. Okay, fine. Any other points anybody would like to raise on the administration report? I'm not seeing any indications. So the recommendation then is that the committee notes that report. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that, please?
I move, Chairman.
Thank you, Philip. Seconder, please. Don't all rush.
I'll second it, Chairman.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Okay, so if please, we can then move to agenda item number 8, which is the risk register. James, please.
Thank you, Chair. Risk register for Q3 has been assessed, as always, in consultation with Councillor Goddard. There's been one adjustment this quarter, which is the removal of the transition between KPMG and ISIO. ISIO have now fully transitioned away from KPMG. We have monitored the service throughout the transition and not seen any reduction in service quality. As such, this risk has been removed. The status of all other risks remains unchanged. I also just want to point out that I do note the comments made at the regulatory training event last week, and this will form part of the assessment for inclusion in the next quarter's report. So if I may pass back to the committee for any questions.
Thank you, James. Any, John, I see you're indicating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I notice under pen 12 that it says we're borderline on cash flow being positive. I mean, is that anything to be concerned about, or are you just being cautious in your comments?
No, that's just being cautious, really. I mean, in terms of, we're talking about contributions from members as opposed to cash flow as a whole scheme. It's in relation to contributions being comparable with pensioner payments. So that's relatively sort of flat. It's just slightly positive in terms of contributions. Of course, in terms of cash flow, we do have dividend income, we have investment income, etc., returns on investments, which would bolster the actual cash position. So in terms of cash, we're actually quite cash rich, and we're having to invest the excess cash to make sure we're not holding too much cash. So that comment is purely in relation to contributions versus benefits going out.
Yeah, if I can just endorse that, John. I mean, there are local authorities, and there's one not a million miles away from us that is, you know, at this sort of very basic level of contributions in versus payments out to members, which is cash flow negative, and the consequence of that is that they're balancing the books, as it were, with investment income. Ours, on the other hand, is quite nicely poised. It's not massively positive, but it's neutral, and in my view, that's a pretty positive attribute to have, actually.
I agree, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay. Any other points on the risk register? Not seeing anything. So, okay. So the recommendation for that is that we consider the risk register in terms of the approach, the specific risks identified, and the measures being taken to mitigate those current risks. Would anybody like to propose that, please?
I'll happily propose it.
Thank you.
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, John. That's great. Thank you very much. So at this point, please, Liz, we have concluded part one, so I think we are ready to cut the feed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Chairman. If everybody could just remain on mute for a moment, I'll stop the live streaming and let you know when it's done.